My name is Madeline Harper, 30 years old, and finally content with the life I rebuilt after devastating betrayal. Standing at my father's funeral, I never expected to see Rebecca strutting in with James, my ex-fiancé, flashing diamonds and a smug smile. "Poor you, still alone." "And I'm bathing in luxury," she whispered, thinking she had won. I simply smiled and said, "Meet my husband." The look on her face when she realized who Matthew was priceless. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and like this video if you've ever had to face someone who tried to destroy you but found strength instead. Rebecca and I grew up as close as sisters could be. At least that's what I thought. 2 years apart, we shared clothes, secrets, and dreams. Our childhood home in suburban Connecticut was filled with memories of us building forts, putting on plays for our parents, and whispering stories late into the night. But beneath that facade of sisterly love ran a current of competition I was too naive to recognize. While I admired her boldness, Rebecca coveted what I had. When I won a spelling bee in 4th grade, she tore my certificate. When I made the cheerleading squad in high school, she suddenly wanted to try out too. I always brushed it off as normal sibling rivalry, making excuses for her behavior, because that's what family does, right? Despite this undercurrent, we remained close through college. I studied marketing at Boston University, while she pursued fashion design at Parsons in New York. Our paths diverged, but we stayed connected, sharing our triumphs and failures over weekly phone calls. I landed a position at Apex Marketing, one of the most prestigious firms in Boston, while Rebecca bounced between internships, never quite finding her footing in the competitive fashion industry. My career flourished quickly. By 25, I was managing major accounts and presenting campaigns to Fortune 500 clients. My personal life, however, remained stagnant, until that fateful marketing conference in Chicago 6 years ago. James Mitchell stood out immediately in a sea of marketing executives. Tall with chestnut hair and confident blue eyes, he commanded attention, without demanding it. He was 32, then a rising star at TechVision, a rapidly growing tech company known for innovative products and aggressive expansion. "Your presentation on digital consumer behavior was impressive," he said, approaching me at the networking reception. "I've been trying to convince my team that we need to pivot our strategy exactly how you suggested." One conversation led to dinner, which turned into weekend visits between Boston and New York, where he was based. James was everything I thought I wanted: ambitious, intelligent, and attentive. We shared dreams of building successful careers while creating a life together. After 8 months of dating during a sunset sail on Boston Harbor, he proposed with a 2-carat diamond ring. "You're everything I've been looking for," he said, as he slipped the ring onto my finger. "Smart, beautiful, and kind. I want to build a life with you, Madeline." I called Rebecca first with the news, screaming with excitement into the phone. She squealed appropriately, but fell strangely silent when I asked her to be my maid of honor. "Of course," she finally said. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." The following months were a whirlwind of wedding planning. We set a date for June 15th, secured a picturesque venue in the Berkshires, and I found a stunning Vera Wang gown that made me feel like royalty. James and I discussed combining our lives in New York, where I would transfer to my company's Manhattan office. Rebecca threw herself into maid of honor duties with unexpected enthusiasm. She organized a lavish bridal shower, helped me select invitations, and accompanied me to every dress fitting. Looking back, the warning signs were there, hidden in plain sight. The way her hand lingered on James's arm when she greeted him. How she always managed to sit beside him at family gatherings. The private jokes they seemed to share. I noticed these things fleetingly, but dismissed them, trusting both my sister and my fiancé implicitly. 3 months before the wedding, I hosted a dinner for my parents, Rebecca and James, at my apartment. Rebecca arrived early to help, wearing a new dress that seemed specifically designed to showcase her figure. "Is that appropriate for a family dinner?" I asked lightly. "Just because you're engaged doesn't mean I can't look good," she replied with a laugh that should have warned me. Throughout dinner, Rebecca dominated the conversation, directing her stories and questions primarily toward James. She touched his shoulder when laughing at his jokes, and refilled his wine glass attentively. When James mentioned a new art exhibit opening in Chelsea, Rebecca immediately exclaimed that she'd been dying to see it. "Maybe we could all go together," she suggested, though her eyes never included me in that all. I caught my mother's concerned glance, but shook off my unease. This was Rebecca being Rebecca, always wanting to be the center of attention. And James. He was just being polite to my sister. I trusted him completely. That trust was the foundation I built my future on. A foundation that was about to crumble beneath my feet, sending me into a free fall I wasn't prepared for. But sometimes the harshest betrayals lead to unexpected strengths. I just couldn't see it yet. The day everything shattered started normally enough. 3 months before our wedding, I was finalizing details with vendors and checking items off my endless to-do list. James had left his phone charging in my apartment while he went for a morning run. When it chimed repeatedly with incoming messages, I glanced over, not intending to snoop, but caught by the preview notifications lighting up his screen. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again," read the first message from Rebecca. My stomach dropped. Surely there was an explanation. Perhaps they were planning a surprise for me. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone. James had never restricted my access, another sign of the trust I thought we shared. I opened the message thread and felt my world collapse. Months of exchanges between them, flirtatious messages, plans to meet when I was working late, photos I could never unsee, references to their growing feelings and guilt about deceiving me. She'd be devastated if she knew James had written. "What she doesn't know won't hurt her," Rebecca replied. "We deserve happiness too." I sat frozen on my couch, the phone clutched in my hand, reading through message after message, until James returned, flushed from his run, and smiling until he saw my face. "Madeline, what's wrong?" I simply held up his phone, the evidence of his betrayal glowing on the screen. His face drained of color as he realized what I had discovered. "I can explain," he started, but his voice faltered. "Explain what?" "How you've been sleeping with my sister behind my back. How you've been lying to me for months." My voice remained eerily calm, belying the hurricane of emotions within me. He attempted denials at first, claiming it was just harmless, flirting, but faced with the explicit messages, his lies crumbled quickly. "It just happened," he finally admitted, sitting heavily on the armchair across from me. "We didn't plan it. Rebecca and I connected one night when you were on that business trip to Chicago. She was helping me plan your birthday surprise, and we had a few drinks. And decided the perfect surprise would be to betray me with my own sister." The sarcasm in my voice was sharp enough to cut. James had the decency to look ashamed, but his next words revealed everything about his character. "I care about you, Madeline, I really do. But with Rebecca there's this passion, this connection I can't explain." I removed my engagement ring and placed it on the coffee table between us. "I think you should leave. Now." After he left, I sat in stunned silence for hours before anger propelled me to Rebecca's apartment in Brooklyn. I pressed her buzzer repeatedly until she answered, her voice annoyed through the intercom. "What? Who is it?" "It's your sister. Open up." The moment she opened the door, she knew. Perhaps it was my red-rimmed eyes, or the absence of my engagement ring, but her expression shifted from surprise to a strange mixture of defiance and guilt. "James told you," she said flatly, not even attempting to deny it. "No, your text messages did." I pushed past her into the apartment. "How could you? My fiancé, my sister." Rebecca crossed her arms defensively. "It's not like I planned it. We just connected on a level that you and he never did. We were planning our wedding. We had a life mapped out." My voice broke, despite my efforts to remain composed. Then came the words that revealed the true nature of her betrayal. With a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes, Rebecca said, "You always got everything you wanted, Madeline. The grades, the career, the perfect fiancé. Now it's my turn. James and I are in love. Real love. Not the safe, boring relationship you had. The calculated cruelty of her words stunned me into silence. This wasn't an impulsive mistake or a moment of weakness. This was deliberate, a systematic undermining of my happiness born from years of resentment I hadn't fully recognized. The following weeks passed in a blur of pain and practical nightmares. Canceling a wedding 3 months before the date meant lost deposits, awkward phone calls to guests, and returning gifts that had already arrived. Each task was a fresh reminder of what I had lost. Explaining the situation to family and friends was excruciating. Some expressed outrage on my behalf, while others uncomfortably suggested that these things happen, and maybe it was for the best. A few even implied that perhaps I had been too focused on my career and neglected my relationship, somehow making James's betrayal understandable, if not justified. Most devastating was my father's response. While initially angry, he eventually adopted a life's too short for grudges attitude. "She's still your sister," he said during a difficult dinner at my parents' home. "Family has to stick together through everything." "Even when family is the one who betrays you?" I asked incredulously. He sighed, looking suddenly older. "People make mistakes, Madeline. Terrible ones sometimes. But forgiveness is part of life." What he didn't understand was that forgiveness requires remorse, and Rebecca showed none. In fact, 2 weeks after the revelation, she and James announced they were officially dating. My mother was horrified, but my father counseled acceptance and moving forward. I spiraled into depression, taking leave from work, and barely leaving my apartment. The dual betrayal of the two people I trusted most left me questioning my judgment and worth. If my own sister could see me as undeserving of loyalty and love, what did that say about me? But rock bottom has a purpose. When you hit it, you can finally stop falling and start climbing. I just didn't know yet how high that climb would take me. The morning I decided to reclaim my life began unceremoniously. 6 weeks after discovering the betrayal, I woke to sunlight streaming through blinds I hadn't opened in days. A job offer I'd received before the engagement implosion sat on my kitchen counter, nearly buried under takeout containers and unopened mail. It was from Horizon Marketing in Seattle, practically across the country from my current shattered life. I picked up the letter, rereading the enthusiastic offer to lead their digital marketing division. The deadline for acceptance had passed weeks ago, but something compelled me to call the number listed. "Actually, we haven't filled the position yet," said Diane, the HR director, after I explained my situation vaguely. "We were quite disappointed when we didn't hear back from you. If you're still interested, when could you start?" "How about 3 weeks from now?" I heard myself say, surprising, even myself with the decisiveness. That call became my turning point. I gave notice at my Boston apartment, arranged a transfer of my most essential belongings to Seattle, and informed my workplace of my departure. When my mother learned of my plans, she was distressed. "You're running away, Madeline. This won't solve anything." "I'm not running away," I corrected her. "I'm running towards something new. There's a difference." Seattle welcomed me with its characteristic rain and unexpected warmth from my new colleagues. I rented a modern apartment downtown, with views of Puget Sound, deliberately choosing a place that bore no resemblance to my Boston home. New city, new home, new beginning. But geography alone couldn't heal the wounds of betrayal. During my second week in Seattle, I had a panic attack in a grocery store when I glimpsed a woman who resembled Rebecca. The incident forced me to acknowledge that distance wasn't enough. I needed to actively process what had happened. I found Dr. Carolyn Thompson, a therapist specializing in trauma and betrayal. Our weekly sessions became anchors in my new life. "What your sister and fiancé did was about them, not you," she emphasized, during one particularly difficult session. "Their actions reflect their character, not your worth." "But shouldn't I have seen it coming?" I asked, still searching for what I had missed. Betrayal blindsides us precisely because we trust. That's not naivety, Madeline. That's being human. Slowly, I began rebuilding. Work provided purpose and distraction. I threw myself into projects proving my value to my new company, while rediscovering my passion for marketing strategy. My team responded to my leadership with enthusiasm, and within 6 months, our campaigns were winning industry recognition. Outside of work, I forced myself to engage with life again. I joined a hiking group discovering the therapeutic effects of climbing mountains and breathing pine-scented air. I took cooking classes, finding satisfaction in creating nourishing meals for myself when previously I had existed on convenience foods and restaurant deliveries. Most importantly, I made new friends who knew nothing of my history. Alicia, a graphic designer at Horizon, became my first real friend in Seattle. She invited me to book clubs and gallery openings, gently coaxing me back into social situations. Through her, I met others: Marcus, a landscape architect with a booming laugh; Sophie, a pediatric nurse with endless compassion; and Daniel, a software engineer, who shared my love for obscure indie films. They became my chosen family, providing support without the complicated history of my biological one. With them, I could be the Madeline I was becoming, not the one defined by betrayal. Occasionally, news of Rebecca and James reached me through mutual friends or family calls. They had moved in together shortly after I left. Rebecca had landed a job at a boutique fashion house, partly due to James's connections. They traveled extensively, posting enviable vacation photos from Bali, Paris, and the Amalfi Coast. From the outside, their life looked picture perfect. My mother, trying to be sensitive, rarely mentioned them, but my father regularly updated me on your sister's life, as though maintaining this connection would somehow preserve our fractured family. Rebecca and James just bought a condo in Tribeca, he mentioned during one call. Really beautiful place. You should see it sometime. Dad, I'm not going to visit their home, I replied, trying to keep frustration from my voice. She's still your sister, Madeline. At some point you'll need to move past this. These conversations left me feeling gaslit, as though my continued hurt was a personal failing, rather than a natural response to profound betrayal. But therapy had given me tools to process these feelings, without being overwhelmed by them. 18 months after moving to Seattle, I realized something had shifted within me. I no longer tensed when seeing happy couples. I could hear Rebecca's name without an immediate stab of pain. The betrayal would always be part of my story, but it was no longer the defining chapter. One evening, after a particularly successful campaign launch, I walked along the waterfront, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular oranges and pinks. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I felt genuinely happy, not just distracted from pain. The realization brought tears to my eyes, but they were tears of release, not sorrow. My phone buzzed with a text from Alicia: celebration dinner at Canlis tomorrow. The whole gang's coming. You in? I typed back. Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it. I was ready to not just exist, but live again. And that openness to life was about to lead me to someone who would help me understand why everything had to fall apart before it could be rebuilt stronger than before. 3 years after the betrayal, my life in Seattle had found its rhythm. I had been promoted to Director of Digital Strategy at Horizon Marketing, leading a team of 15 talented professionals. My friendships had deepened, and I had even cautiously dated a few men, though nothing progressed beyond a handful of pleasant but ultimately forgettable evenings. Then came the Robinson Tech account, a major corporation looking to revamp their entire marketing strategy. Securing this client would put Horizon on the map nationally, and represented months of preparation and pitch development. The CEO is notoriously demanding, warned my boss Gerald as we prepared for the final presentation. Matthew Taylor built Robinson Tech from nothing, and has rejected every major marketing firm they've met with. He's brilliant but particular. Don't take it personally if he passes. I spent weeks perfecting our proposal, researching Robinson Tech's market position, and identifying untapped opportunities. By the time presentation day arrived, I knew our pitch inside and out, but still felt the flutter of nerves as we waited in the Robinson Tech conference room. When Matthew Taylor walked in, he wasn't what I expected. Based on his reputation, I had imagined someone older, perhaps stern and intimidating. Instead, Matthew was in his late 30s, with kind brown eyes that crinkled at the corners, when he smiled, and an unassuming presence that nonetheless commanded attention. "Sorry to keep you waiting," he said, shaking hands with each team member. When he reached me, his handshake was firm, his gaze direct. "You must be Madeline Harper. I was impressed by the preliminary materials you sent over." Throughout our presentation, Matthew asked insightful questions that revealed both his deep understanding of his company and his genuine interest in our approach. Unlike many executives who seem to make decisions based on ego or surface impressions, he engaged thoughtfully with our ideas. "You've identified opportunities we hadn't considered," he admitted afterward. "I'd like to work with your team, but specifically with you, Miss Harper. Your strategic thinking aligns with where I see Robinson Tech heading." The collaboration began the following week. Matthew and I established a weekly meeting to review progress and adjust strategy as needed. Unlike other clients who delegated after initial meetings, he remained hands-on, genuinely interested in the creative process. During one late working session at Robinson Tech headquarters, our conversation drifted from marketing strategies to personal interests. I learned that Matthew had built his company from a startup in his garage to a major player in enterprise software over 12 years of dedicated work. "Technology was always interesting to me, but what really drives me is solving problems," he explained, as we shared takeout dinner in his office, seeing a solution where others see only obstacles. "Is that why you named the company Robinson?" I asked, after Robinson Crusoe solving problems on his island. He looked surprised, then laughed. "You're the first person who's ever made that connection. It was actually my grandfather's name, but I like your interpretation better. Maybe I'll use that story from now on." Something shifted that evening. Our professional relationship had developed an undercurrent of personal connection, a mutual recognition of like-minded spirits. Still, I maintained careful boundaries, unwilling to risk misinterpreting friendly rapport for something more. Matthew respected those unspoken boundaries while making his interest clear in subtle ways. He began bringing coffee to our meetings, remembering exactly how I took mine. He asked thoughtful questions about my weekend plans, and followed up on stories I shared about my hiking adventures or cooking disasters. 3 months into the Robinson Tech project, he invited me to a charity gala his company was sponsoring. As colleagues, he clarified, sensing my hesitation. "The whole team is invited, but I'd especially appreciate your insights on how we present to potential partners." The event was held at the Seattle Art Museum, transformed for the evening into an elegant venue with stunning floral arrangements and ambient lighting. Matthew greeted me at the entrance, handsome, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his appreciation genuine without being invasive. Throughout the evening, I observed Matthew in his element, gracious with employees at all levels, generous with the charity organizers, and completely lacking the arrogance that often accompanied success. When a waiter accidentally spilled water on his sleeve, Matthew helped the mortified young man clean up the mess quietly, assuring him it was no problem. "You're not what I expected," I admitted during a quiet moment on the museum's terrace, the Seattle skyline glittering before us. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more." I searched for the right word. "Full of himself," Matthew suggested with a self-deprecating smile. "Maybe. Success changes people, usually not for the better." "My mother would agree with you," he said. "She reminds me regularly that I put my pants on one leg at a time just like everyone else." As the evening drew to a close, Matthew walked me to my car. The air between us had changed, charged with unspoken possibility. "I've enjoyed working with you, Madeline," he said. "But I'd like to get to know you outside of work if you're open to that." The familiar fear rose within me, memories of James and his betrayal flashing through my mind. Matthew seemed to sense my hesitation. "Just dinner," he added gently. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other better. I took a deep breath. I should be honest with you. My last relationship ended badly, and I'm still cautious about getting involved with someone. I appreciate your honesty. For what it's worth, I respect caution. It usually means someone values themselves enough to be careful with their heart. He handed me his card with his personal number written on the back. The ball's in your court. If you decide you'd like to have dinner sometime, just let me know. It took me 2 weeks to call him. 2 weeks of internal debate and conversations with my therapist about healthy risk-taking versus self-protection. You can't avoid connection forever, because one person betrayed you, Dr. Thompson pointed out. That gives them power over your future. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant overlooking Lake Union. With work no longer our focus, we discovered shared interests in historical documentaries, mystery novels, and terrible science fiction movies that were so bad they became good again. My college roommate and I had a tradition, Matthew explained, laughing. Every finals week we'd watch the worst sci-fi movie we could find as stress relief. Nothing puts academic pressure in perspective like watching aliens with visible zipper lines in their costumes. As weeks turned into months, Matthew proved himself trustworthy in countless small ways. He called when he said he would. He remembered details from our conversations. He respected my need for independence and never pushed for more than I was ready to give. When I finally told him about James and Rebecca 6 months into our relationship, he listened without interruption, holding my hand across his dining table. I understand now why trust doesn't come easily to you, he said when I finished. Thank you for sharing that with me. It couldn't have been easy. It still affects me, I admitted. Sometimes I worry I'm looking for signs of betrayal that aren't there. Then we'll take things at whatever pace feels right for you, he replied. I'm not going anywhere, Madeline. And he didn't. Matthew became my partner in the truest sense of the word, someone who stood beside me rather than trying to stand in front of or behind me. With him, I learned that real love wasn't about grand gestures or intense passion that burned quickly. It was about consistent presence, mutual respect, and a deep friendship that formed the foundation for everything else. I was falling in love again, but this time with my eyes wide open, and what I saw looking back at me was everything I hadn't known I needed. After 2 years of dating, Matthew and I had developed a relationship built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. We had settled into comfortable routines: Sunday morning hikes, followed by brunch at our favorite cafe, weeknight cooking experiments, in his spacious kitchen, and quiet evenings, reading together on his terrace overlooking Lake Washington. I had maintained my apartment downtown, though I spent most nights at Matthew's house, a modern yet warm home in Madison Park. The arrangement gave me the independence I still cherished, while allowing us to build a life together. When Matthew proposed, it wasn't during a grand gesture or public spectacle. It was on an ordinary Tuesday evening, as we prepared dinner together, chopping vegetables side by side. I was thinking, he said casually, that life is better with you in it. Every day. And I was wondering if you might want to make that arrangement permanent. I looked up to find him holding a small velvet box, instead of the bell pepper he had been slicing. Inside was a simple but elegant emerald-cut diamond set in platinum. It's not the most romantic proposal, he continued when I remained silent in surprise. But I wanted it to be honest, like us. I love our everyday life together, Madeline. I want a lifetime of these ordinary moments that become extraordinary because we're sharing them. The ring was beautiful, but what moved me more was the thoughtfulness behind his choice. He hadn't tried to outdo James's proposal or ring. Instead, he had chosen something that reflected our relationship, straightforward, elegant, and genuine. But despite my love for Matthew, panic flared. Images of my canceled wedding, of James and Rebecca's betrayal, flooded my mind. Matthew noticed the shift immediately. Talk to me, he said, setting the ring box on the counter and taking my hands. Whatever you're thinking, we can figure it out together. I want to say yes, I admitted, my voice shaking slightly. But I'm scared. Last time, I planned a future with someone. I know, he said softly. And I'm not asking you to forget that happened, or pretend it didn't affect you. It's part of what made you the woman I fell in love with. He led me to the living room couch, the vegetables forgotten on the cutting board. We sat facing each other, still holding hands. I'm not James, he said simply. And this isn't that relationship. We've built something different, something stronger, because it's based on who we really are, not who we pretend to be. We talked for hours that night about fears and hopes, about what marriage meant to each of us, about the life we wanted to build together. By the time we returned to the kitchen to salvage our dinner preparations, I had said yes, and the ring fit perfectly on my finger. Unlike my first engagement, we planned a small, intimate ceremony. No grand venue in the Berkshires, no hundreds of guests, no elaborate princess gown. We married 6 months later on the shores of Lake Washington, with only 30 of our closest friends and family in attendance. My parents came, though my relationship with them remained complicated. My father especially seemed unable to understand why I still maintained distance from Rebecca, who was pointedly not invited, despite his repeated suggestions that a wedding is a time for family to come together. This is about starting our life together, I explained firmly, when he brought it up for the third time, not about revisiting past hurts. Our wedding day dawned clear and bright, unusual for Seattle in April. I wore a simple silk sheath dress, my hair adorned with small white flowers instead of a veil. Matthew waited for me at the end of a short aisle, created by rows of white chairs on the lawn. His smile, when he saw me, containing all the love and promise I could hope for. Our vows were personal, written by each of us to reflect our individual commitments. Matthew promised patience, honesty, and partnership. I promised trust, courage, and forgiveness, not just for him, but for myself. Today I choose to believe in love again, I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion behind the words. Not because I've forgotten pain, but because you've shown me that real love is worth the risk. The reception was held in a tent on the same property, fairy lights twinkling overhead as dusk fell. We danced, laughed, and celebrated with the people who had supported our journey together. Dr. Thompson, my therapist-turned-friend, raised a toast to resilience and second chances that brought tears to my eyes. Our honeymoon was 2 weeks in New Zealand, hiking through breathtaking landscapes and staying in small, luxurious lodges along the way. It was there, far from the remnants of my past life, that I truly embraced our future without reservation. Upon returning to Seattle, we settled into married life with surprising ease. I moved my remaining belongings into Matthew's house, which became our home. We established new traditions while honoring the individual interests that made us who we were. Matthew encouraged my career advancement and celebrated my successes as his own, while I supported his vision for expanding Robinson Tech into new markets. 8 months after our wedding, Matthew came home with unexpected news. Robinson Tech had acquired TechVision, James's company, as part of a larger expansion strategy. I should have made the connection sooner, Matthew said, looking troubled. I knew the name sounded familiar when the acquisition team first brought it up, but it didn't click until today when I was reviewing the executive profiles. James Mitchell is their vice president of operations. My stomach tightened at the name, but the visceral pain I once associated with it had dulled to a distant ache. It's a good business decision, I said after a moment. You shouldn't change your plans because of my history. Are you sure I could delay the acquisition, look into other options? I shook my head. That would be letting the past dictate our future. I'm done giving them that power. The acquisition proceeded with Matthew maintaining professional distance from the integration process, delegating the direct oversight to his executive team. I appreciated his sensitivity, but assured him I had made peace with that chapter of my life. What neither of us anticipated was the discovery made during the standard financial audit of TechVision. Discrepancies appeared in their books, leading to a deeper investigation that revealed James had been embezzling company funds to support a lifestyle beyond his legitimate earnings. The board wants to press charges, Matthew informed me one evening. The evidence is conclusive. He's been siphoning money for at least 3 years, clever enough to hide it during routine audits, but not thorough enough for the kind of deep dive we do during acquisitions. What will happen to him, I asked, surprised by my lack of vindictive satisfaction. Termination, certainly. Criminal charges, probably. It's not my decision alone, but, as CEO, I'll have to sign off on the board's recommendation. Will you recuse yourself because of our connection? Matthew considered this thoughtfully. I think I need to. Not because I can't be objective about the business decision, but because I want there to be no question about the integrity of the process. James was fired the following week, escorted from the building by security, after being confronted with evidence of his financial misconduct. The company filed charges beginning a legal process that would eventually result in a plea deal to avoid jail time, but requiring significant financial restitution. I learned these details secondhand, deliberately keeping myself removed from the situation. What I didn't know then was that this professional downfall would soon intersect with my personal history in an unexpected way. 3 weeks after James's termination, my father called with news that blindsided me. He had suffered a mild heart attack but was stable and recovering well. Despite our complicated relationship, I immediately booked a flight to Connecticut, with Matthew arranging to join me 2 days later, after completing some unavoidable business obligations. What I didn't anticipate was that this family medical crisis would force a confrontation 5 years in the making, one that would finally bring the ghosts of my past face to face with the reality of my present. My father's heart attack was more serious than initially described. By the time I arrived at Hartford Hospital, he had been moved to intensive care after complications developed. My mother, looking years older than when I had last seen her at our wedding, met me in the waiting room. "They're doing everything they can," she said, her voice betraying exhaustion. "The next 24 hours are critical." Despite the best efforts of the medical team, my father passed away the following morning with my mother and me at his bedside. The loss hit me with unexpected force. Our relationship had been strained since Rebecca's betrayal, his inability to fully acknowledge the hurt she had caused, creating a distance between us. Yet, in that moment of his passing, I felt only the love of a daughter for her imperfect father. The days that followed passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, notification calls to relatives, and the surreal process of beginning to grieve. Matthew arrived as promised, providing steady support as we navigated these difficult waters. My mother, despite her grief, seemed relieved to have him take charge of certain practical matters, from coordinating with the funeral home to arranging for out-of-town relatives' accommodations. "He's a good man," she said quietly one evening, as Matthew fielded yet another call from a distant cousin about service details. "Your father would have liked to know him better." The comment carried unspoken regret for the time, and relationship lost to misplaced loyalty and unresolved conflict. I squeezed her hand in silent acknowledgement. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and cool, fitting the somber occasion. The service was scheduled for 11 at the Presbyterian church my parents had attended for decades. Matthew and I arrived early to ensure everything was properly arranged and to greet guests as they arrived. I was speaking with my father's oldest friend when a ripple of tension moved through the gathering. Turning toward the church entrance, I saw them, Rebecca and James, making a calculated entrance designed to draw attention. Rebecca wore a black designer dress that somehow managed to be both funeral-appropriate and attention-seeking, with diamond earrings and a matching necklace that caught the light with every movement. James, at her side, was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his arm possessively around her waist. Despite recent professional disgrace, he projected confidence, chin lifted as though daring anyone to question his presence. My mother stiffened beside me, her expression a mixture of parental love and discomfort. "She's still his daughter," she whispered, as though justifying Rebecca's presence to herself as much as to me. I nodded, determined not to let their presence overshadow the purpose of the day. "It's fine. We're here to honor Dad." The ceremony proceeded with dignity, filled with remembrances of my father's life and character. I delivered a eulogy that focused on his generosity and devotion to family, carefully crafted to honor his memory without glossing over his humanity. Throughout, I was aware of Rebecca's gaze evaluating and judging from her seat, 3 rows behind where the immediate family sat. At the reception following the service held in the church fellowship hall, I maintained a careful distance from my sister and her partner. This proved increasingly difficult as the space filled with guests, offering condolences and sharing memories of my father. I was speaking with my father's brother when I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I found Rebecca standing uncomfortably close, a glass of wine in her manicured hand, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. James hovered nearby, engaged in conversation, but clearly monitoring our interaction. "Little sister Rebecca," said her voice, carrying just enough to draw attention from those nearby. "It's been what, 5 years you look?" She paused, eyes sweeping over me assessingly. "Well enough, I suppose." "Rebecca," I acknowledged with a nod, determined to remain civil. "Thank you for coming. Dad would have appreciated it." Of course I came. Unlike some people, I maintained a relationship with our father. The barb was deliberate, aimed at my reduced contact with our parents following her betrayal. Before I could respond, Matthew appeared at my side, his hand gently touching the small of my back in silent support. Rebecca's eyes flicked to him, narrowing slightly as she took in his tailored suit and confident bearing. "You must be the new boyfriend," she said dismissively. "I'm Rebecca, Madeline's sister. This is James, my partner." She emphasized the word as if to remind me of what she had taken. "Matthew Taylor," he replied smoothly, extending his hand. "Madeline's husband, actually. We've been married for over a year now." Something flashed in Rebecca's eyes, surprise quickly masked by forced indifference. She hadn't known I had remarried. Our mother, respecting my wishes, had apparently kept this information from her. "Husband, well, isn't that sweet?" She recovered quickly. "And what do you do, Matthew?" "I run a technology company based in Seattle." James, who had joined our circle upon hearing introductions, suddenly stiffened his expression, shifting from polite disinterest to alarmed recognition. "Matthew Taylor of Robinson Tech," he asked, his voice slightly higher than normal. Matthew turned to him with perfect composure. "That's right. And you must be James Mitchell, formerly of TechVision." An uncomfortable silence fell over our small group as the implication of this connection dawned on Rebecca. Her eyes darted between James and Matthew, confusion giving way to understanding. "Poor you, still alone. After all this time," Rebecca said to me, desperation making her cruel as she tried to regain control of the interaction. She touched her diamond necklace deliberately. "And look at me bathing in luxury. I guess some of us just know how to hold on to a good thing." The naked aggression of her statement, inappropriate, even for her at our father's funeral, created a palpable tension. Several nearby guests glanced over uncomfortably. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw beyond the expensive clothes and jewelry to the insecurity and emptiness beneath. In that moment, I felt an unexpected mixture of pity and release. "Rebecca, I'd like you to meet my husband properly," I said calmly. "Matthew Taylor, CEO of Robinson Tech, which recently acquired TechVision." I turned to James, whose complexion had paled significantly. "Though I believe you two have already crossed paths professionally, haven't you?" James swallowed visibly. "Mr. Taylor, I didn't realize that I was married to the woman whose life you helped upend." Matthew's tone remained conversational, but there was steel beneath it. "Life has interesting symmetry sometimes." Rebecca's composure faltered as she processed the implications. "What does he mean, James?" she demanded, her voice losing its cultivated smoothness. "What happened with TechVision?" James shifted uncomfortably. "I was going to tell you," he muttered. "There were some issues at work. I'm between positions right now." "Between positions?" Matthew raised an eyebrow. "That's certainly one way to describe being terminated for financial misconduct." The color drained from Rebecca's face. "What is he talking about, James?" Perhaps this isn't the best venue for this discussion, I suggested, quietly aware of the attention we were attracting. But Rebecca was beyond social niceties now. Is it true? She demanded of James. Did you lose your job? Is that why you've been making excuses about the credit cards being declined? Why we had to cancel Aspen? James's attempt to quiet her only fueled her anger. Those diamonds, she hissed, touching her necklace. You said they were real. Are they even real, James? Rebecca, please, he muttered, glancing around at the growing audience. My mother approached, concern etched on her face. What's going on here? Nothing, Mom, I said gently. Rebecca and James were just leaving to discuss some private matters. Rebecca turned to me, fury and humiliation battling in her expression. For a moment I glimpsed the wounded little girl beneath the polished exterior, the sister, who had always felt second best, and had built her identity around taking what wasn't hers. This isn't over, she said. But the threat sounded hollow even to her own ears. Actually it is, I replied softly. It has been for a long time. I wish you well, Rebecca, I really do. As they left, Rebecca arguing with James in fierce whispers, my mother touched my arm. I'm sorry, she said simply, for everything. Your father wanted to believe family could overcome anything. He couldn't see that sometimes the harm comes from within the family itself. I hugged her, feeling a shift in our relationship, a new understanding, forming from shared grief and belated recognition. I know, Mom. I know he did his best with the tools he had. Matthew stood beside us, his presence, a reminder of the life I had built from the ashes of betrayal. In that moment, surrounded by the complicated tapestry of family loss and love, I understood that sometimes closure doesn't come in the form we expect. Sometimes it arrives unannounced in a church fellowship hall wearing diamonds that might not be real after all. After the confrontation at the funeral reception, Matthew and I retreated to a quiet corner of the church garden. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the carefully tended flower beds, a peaceful contrast to the emotional turbulence inside. Are you okay? Matthew asked, his hand warm and steady in mine. I considered the question carefully. Yes, I said finally. Better than I expected to be, actually. Seeing them together used to feel like having the air punched from my lungs. Today it just felt sad. Sad for them, not for me. Matthew nodded, understanding, without need for further explanation. This was one of the countless reasons I loved him, his ability to give space for my feelings without trying to fix or minimize them. I never wanted revenge. I continued watching a pair of chickadees flit between the branches of a nearby maple. But there's a certain symmetry to how things turned out, isn't there? Life has its own justice sometimes, he agreed. Though, I want to be clear that James's termination was purely business. The financial improprieties were serious and would have resulted in the same outcome, regardless of who he was. I know that, I assured him. You've always had integrity in everything you do. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. We sat in comfortable silence until my mother found us, her eyes red-rimmed but her expression calmer than it had been all day. Most of the guests have left, she said, settling onto the bench beside me. Just family and a few close friends still inside. How are you holding up? I asked, concerned. By the new lines grief had etched around her eyes. 1 minute at a time, she replied honestly. Your father wasn't perfect, Madeline, but he loved us all very much. He just never knew how to navigate the hurt between his daughters. I know, Mom. I've made peace with that. She hesitated, then added, Rebecca left. After quite a scene with James in the parking lot. I think perhaps I've been enabling her for too long, believing her version of events because it was easier than acknowledging the truth. This admission, however, tentative, was more than I had ever expected from my mother, who had always sought middle ground, even when there was none to be found. We can talk about all of that later, I said gently. Today is about Dad. We returned inside to find my aunts, uncles, and a few of my father's oldest friends sharing stories over coffee and the remains of the reception food. The atmosphere had lightened, somewhat grief, making space for fond remembrances and even occasional laughter. My father's brother David approached his resemblance to my dad, striking enough to cause a moment of disorientation. "Your eulogy was beautiful, Madeline," he said, embracing me. "Robert would have been proud. And he would have been glad to see you so happy," he added, nodding toward Matthew. "I always told him you'd find your way." "Were you close to my father-in-law?" Matthew asked. David smiled sadly. "We drifted apart in recent years, but we were inseparable as boys. I tried to talk to him about the situation with Rebecca, you know. Told him he was making a mistake by not acknowledging the harm done. But Rob always believed family harmony was the highest good, even if it meant papering over deep wounds." This insight into my father's thinking wasn't new, but hearing it from his brother lent it a poignancy that brought fresh tears to my eyes. My father had made choices. I disagreed with choices that had hurt me, but they had come from a place of love, however misguided. The following morning, before returning to Seattle, Matthew and I visited the cemetery. My father's grave, marked by a temporary plate until the permanent headstone could be installed, was covered with flowers from the funeral. I placed a small stone on top of the marker, a tradition my father had always observed when visiting his own parents' graves. "I wish you could have known Matthew better," I said quietly. "You would have liked the man he is." Matthew stood respectfully a few paces away, giving me privacy for this final goodbye. When I joined him, he asked, "Do you want to see if Rebecca is still in town? Try to talk things through." I considered this thoughtfully. "No," I decided. "Not right now. Maybe someday. But I think we both need more time and perspective." We were nearly at the cemetery gates when my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Can we meet before you leave town? Just us." I showed the message to Matthew, who squeezed my shoulder supportively. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." After brief consideration, I replied, "The cafe, on Main Street, 30 minutes. Rebecca was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table, with an untouched cappuccino before her. She had traded yesterday's dramatic funeral attire for jeans and a simple blouse, her face scrubbed of makeup, making her look younger and more vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," she said, as I sat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, years of hurt and betrayal, creating a chasm too wide to bridge with small talk. "James and I broke up," she finally said, staring into her coffee. "Last night, after I found out he'd been lying about everything, the job, the money." She twisted her bare ring finger, where an engagement ring had been prominently displayed at the funeral. "The diamonds were cubic zirconia. The luxury apartment is mortgaged to the hilt. It was all a facade." I didn't know what response she wanted from me, so I simply waited. "I wanted you to think I had won," she continued, her voice small. "That taking James from you was worth it, because we were so happy, so successful. I needed to believe it myself." "Were you ever happy?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Rebecca considered this, her expression thoughtful. "In the beginning, maybe. Or, I convinced myself we were. But James, he never looked at me the way Matthew looks at you. And deep down, I always knew what we did to you was unforgivable." "Why, Rebecca? I've never understood why my own sister would hurt me that way." She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Because you were always enough, just as you were. Mom and Dad were so proud of you, your grades, your career, your sensible choices. I was the wild one. The one they worried about. The one who couldn't seem to get it right. And then you found James, and he was successful and handsome and clearly adored you. I just wanted to prove I could have that too. That I could take something that was yours and make it mine." The honesty of her answer, however, painful to hear, provided a kind of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. "I can't forgive you today," I said, after a long moment. "Maybe not for a very long time. But I don't hate you, Rebecca. I stopped hating you years ago. It took too much energy that I needed for rebuilding my life." "I understand," she nodded, wiping a tear that had escaped. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just because everything fell apart, but because I hurt you. You didn't deserve that. We parted with an awkward half-hug, not friends, or even fully reconciled sisters, but perhaps no longer active enemies. It was a beginning, however small. Matthew was waiting at our hotel, respecting my wish to meet Rebecca alone. "How did it go?" he asked as I entered our room. "Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped." I sat beside him on the edge of the bed. She apologized, actually. I think she meant it. "Do you think you'll ever reconcile completely?" I considered this carefully. I don't know. Some bridges once burned can't be fully rebuilt. But maybe we can construct something new. Something different. Not what was, but what could be. We flew back to Seattle that afternoon, returning to the life we had built together. In the following months, I maintained sporadic, cautious contact with Rebecca as she began her own process of rebuilding, finding a modest apartment, and taking a position at a small design firm. Our relationship remained complicated, tentative texts and occasional phone calls, gradually increasing in frequency and depth. I doubted we would ever recapture the closeness of our childhood, but perhaps we could forge a new connection based on who we had become, rather than who we had been. As for me, the final confrontation with Rebecca and James had released something I hadn't realized. I was still carrying a weight of unresolved hurt and anger that had lingered despite my new happiness. In its place grew a deeper appreciation for the life I had created from the ashes of betrayal. Matthew and I continued to build our life together, his company flourishing under his ethical leadership, my career advancing, as I took on increasingly challenging projects. We bought a weekend cabin on the Olympic Peninsula, where we spent peaceful weekends hiking and disconnecting from the demands of our professional lives. 5 years after my sister stole my fiancé, I found myself not just surviving but thriving, with a love deeper and more authentic than anything I had known before. The betrayal that once defined me had become merely a chapter in my story, not its conclusion. I learned that trust once broken can be rebuilt, but it requires willing participants and consistent effort. That forgiveness isn't a single moment but a process, sometimes lifelong. That family is both who we're born to and who we choose, and sometimes the family we choose provides the healing our birth family cannot. Most importantly, I learned that while we can't control the actions of others, we always have a choice in how we respond. We can remain trapped in bitterness, or we can use even the deepest wounds as catalysts for growth and transformation. Life rarely follows the path we expect, and the detours, however painful, often lead us exactly where we need to be. Had Rebecca and James not betrayed me, I might never have moved to Seattle, never met Matthew, never discovered my own resilience and capacity for rebuilding. This isn't to say I'm grateful for their betrayal, but I am grateful for the woman it forced me to become, for the life it ultimately led me to create. Sometimes the greatest gift emerges from our deepest pain, if we have the courage to keep moving forward. Have you ever experienced betrayal that ultimately led to something better? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you're currently walking through your own valley of betrayal, please know that healing is possible. The path isn't linear, and it isn't quick, but it is real. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more authentic conversations about life's challenges and triumphs. Remember, your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Wishing you strength on your journey, whatever path you're walking.